Okay, so it says, okay, so if I press Zoom, it wants me to do upgrade to Ecamm Pro Live. Maybe I need to go to a scheduled meeting. Yep, I'll go to scheduled meeting. Oh, I thought you were. Okay. Okay. 1 minute left. That's kind of funny. Uh, okay. I'm so, okay. So,
Recording in progress.
okay, it's recording. It's recording on Zoom. I would go back to Ecamm. What do I do now? Well, I think it already it's ready to finish. This is live with 1 minute and 42 seconds. I think it might. Can you tell me whether I'm broadcasting or not? You can't tell me that. Yes, at David Campt. Yeah, the blank one, not the full green one. Yeah. I think I'm at the dial. Um, yes. At the dialogue. I'm at the dialogue on Instagram. Yes. How about Facebook? David Campt. Okay. Are there any other people? Can you tell? Are you able to see that? Is that something you can see? Okay, I'm up there. Okay. So what should I do now? The Zoom meeting is supposedly open. Mm-hmm. Look at that. Ooh, somebody tried to get into the room. Let's see. I'll admit them. What? Well, okay. Hey, Chris. Chris, can you hear
Hi.
me? Hey,
Hello.
hi there.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm okay. So I'm on the phone with my tech support person who's as frustrated with me as she usually is because she can't believe how much support I need. We just figured out, went through a long process to try to figure out how to get this working. I've never used Ecamm before, and we're adding Zoom to it, so you can see me on Zoom. Ooh, another person's joining. So I'm on Facebook and it goes. I'm talking to her. I'm talking on Facebook. I'm on Facebook Live, right? And it goes like, okay, should I hang up with you or not? Probably not. Live my best. But okay, call me if necessary. All right, look at this. I can't believe. What time is it in Greece where you are, Chris?
It is 3 a.m.
You are committed to growing your skill set. That's
Yes,
amazing.
I am. That is a true statement.
All right. So, Becca, can you hear us?
Can you hear David? I've lost my voice.
Okay. Well, we won't ask a lot. Okay. Got you.
Bummer.
Well, it's
And
awesome.
I'm sorry. I think I'm late. Am I correct that this has been going?
No, you're. I mean, you're within. You're not late. I mean, no, you're good. You're good. We started 8 o'clock. It's 8:04. This is within the margin of tardiness. So I was tardy. We're fine. So thank you for joining. So I'm so grateful to have y'all join in this, and I'll be monitoring for other people joining. But also, I want to make this next hour or so valuable for you. So, again, my name is Dr. David Camp with the Dialogue Company, and what we're here to do is to share with you a few things, three specific conversational strategies that experts have determined are really important for trying to influence people. And these are general influence methods, but of course, we're 20 days or so away from an election in the US. And so I'm particularly concerned about that, and not just about the run up to the election. Because here's the finding. The finding is that our best practice methods to try to influence people, to persuade them, they run through the process of connecting with people. I.e., if you were given a set of instructions for how to connect with somebody you have a disagreement with, and you were given a different set of instructions based on best practices about what to do to influence people, they're like 90% overlap. So we really need to understand what those are. And that has profound implications, especially in a divided country where very shortly half of us will be very disappointed about what happened in the election, and maybe even angry, some of us violently angry. And so it's going to be important that a lot of people understand what these skills are to try to do the reconciliation that's needed, not just nationally, but within families. I know that, especially among white folks, because of the way the white opinion cuts on the Trump MAGA issue, a lot of white people have degraded, broken relationships because of politics. Much less true for people of color because of just the way that voting works in different populations. My opinion is that the conversation both around the election, both before it and afterward, the conversation among white people it's an issue of national concern. And so it is really important that everybody understand these methods, but especially white folks. I'm pro Kamala Harris. I think that electing Mr. Trump would be really, really a problem. But no matter, we have a divided country. And so it is important that we learn the skills of dialogue in order to foster the reconciliation that will be needed no matter who wins. And we're in a fortunate world where the things we need to do to heal the nation later, if we start practicing them now, because they're counterintuitive, it actually can help us create the result we want. Again, we're very fortunate that the metro stop of persuasion runs through the metro stop of connection. So the things I'm going to talk about are going to highlight what those three of those important steps, and I'm hoping to have a conversation with y'all about how y'all might use them if there are people in your circle of contacts that you want to persuade or connect to. Okay, so I know, Becca, you're having voice issues, so I'm not going to stress you too much. We can open the chat up. Let me just, I'll ask this. I see what you said. You saw me present before. I appreciate your attending, Becca. So I'll ask you, Becca, in the chat, and you, Chris, do you know any people in your circle, not your super close circle, but you're sort of a larger circle, who are either Trump supporters or Trump curious? Do you know any people like that? Say a little bit more about who you know, Chris.
So 3 years ago, I moved from California to Texas, and I moved into what I thought would be sort of a balanced political social climate, but as it turned out, it was quite conservative, much more than I had predicted. So I find myself in a community that is extremely conservative, and they believe that Trump is the Messiah, and that everyone else that does not see that is completely out of their mind. So I'm in a very unusual place because I'm living and socializing in a group of people. It's not my whole social circle, of course, but I moved my physical being into a place that was very conservative. Thank you, Becca. Thank you. So I know a lot of people, and I had a lot of really rude comments. I don't share my political views with most people that I live close to. But there is a small group of Democrats who support Kamala Harris, and that group I kind of cling to as people that I can be open and honest with. So I feel like one of the things that I would like to be able to do more of is be honest with my neighbors around what I really think, but I don't because I'm in the midst of very conservative thinking. So it's a challenging situation. That's my home situation. And I do know people in California that are also Trump supporters, surprisingly, and I still don't understand how that is the case. But so I have much exposure to Trump supporters.
Okay. So I want to ask, so thank you for that. And again, I'm not going to ask you to speak unless you really want to. Becca, you could type anything, sort of an analogous answer on that, or if you want to speak, that's fine. And also, I want to ask both of you about, so there's Trump supporters or Trump curious, which is an issue. And then there's also people who are left-leaning but are not committed to voting. Because what we see electorally is that both campaigns try to do two things. They try to persuade people who are on their side, who are uncommitted voters. Again, 1/3 of Americans didn't vote in 2020. So a whole bunch of people don't vote. And almost everybody knows people who don't vote. And that's true no matter what race or background you are. In fact, black people vote a little bit less than white folks. But then there's also the small set of people who are undecided. So, you're in the Bay Area. Got you, Becca. So do either of y'all know anybody who, as far as you know, are left-leaning but have a kind of a shaky commitment to voting? And the reason I'm asking the question is because the methods that I want to talk about could be used both to persuade people who are on your side who might not be committed to voting, because then you're trying to persuade them to get off the couch versus not, right? Or people who are undecided. Now, it turns out, as we will discuss, the same methods can be used to look on MAGA supporters who you're not likely to convince, but it turns out that using compassion-based techniques tends to weaken support for. So they're useful techniques to know anyway, even if you're not going to spend a lot of time on MAGA folks. Because the skills are counterintuitive, it's useful to practice them if the opportunity comes up, but you wouldn't necessarily spend time on reaching those people. But it's useful, but when it comes up, you can practice them because you're developing a certain set of muscles. Now, I hope that's making sense to you. So, Becca, so I'm interested in your answer, Chris, verbally, but Becca, if you know any people, sounds like your Bay Area comment means you don't know any people who are Trump supporters or even Trump adjacent. I got you. If you know any people who you know are sort of left leaning, but shaky voters, you can also comment on that. How about you, Chris? You know any people who are left leaning, but they have a unclear commitment to voting?
I'm drinking hot tea, so I'm gonna, sorry.
Oh,
I'll let
okay.
you-
Go ahead.
We love to hear
I'm
you, Chris.
drinking hot
I mean,
tea,
Becca.
so I'm gonna try, and I was gonna say, I probably don't know any people that are gonna vote or are leaning towards Trump, although I may know them peripherally.
Mm-hmm.
But I do a lot of work around around justice work, around the legal system.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a lot of trouble with people more conservative. That I think this will still apply to. I'm hoping. I think.
Sure. Okay. Chris, you know any people who you think are left leaning, but their commitment to voting is, shaky? Again, they might be in the 1/3 of people who might not vote.
I probably do know them, but I don't know exactly. I
Yeah.
I could not categorize them in this way because it seems that almost all real conversation has shut down.
Mm.
So it's difficult. It's really difficult to know. Everyone is very close to the vest on where they stand. So where they stand politically, where they stand, whether they're going to vote or not, it's really a very private conversation now, when it used to be much more open. But I couldn't say. I probably know people that are left leaning, but not sure if they're going to vote.
But when
Probably no.
everybody has experienced difficult, nasty or just difficult conversations around politics, then we all don't talk about it. And of course, I would argue that not only is that's something that not only Thomas Jefferson wouldn't like, but Vladimir Putin does like that. Like ultimately, democracy thrives when people can talk to each other, and autocracy can flourish when people don't talk to each other. So part of what this whole thing is about, I'm glad you brought that up, is trying to give people on ramps to a better conversation, so we can shift that. I think it's possible for people through how we bring things up and how we have conversations to actually make progress on this very unfortunate but understandable social convention that we don't talk about these things. That's part of what I'm trying to teach about. But of course, the bigger goals after you open it up, you want to make the conversations good and perhaps be even influential. Okay. So, what I like to do to make sure we move forward and get to all three elements, I want to lay out a little bit of neuroscience findings that the techniques I want to talk about are based on. Now, I can do this really quickly because I've done it a lot. So one of the things that we know from the brain science, we know this from the past 20, 30 years, is that there's something called the backfire effect. And the backfire effect is relevant to what happens with somebody when you bring up facts that contradict their perspective. People have done experiments where you put people in MRI machines and the MRI is on their brain, and you show them video of their favorite politician contradicting themselves. And what happens is that the part of the brain that lights up when we're under physical threat lights up when we're under essentially ideological threat. So when we're presented with information that tends to threaten our views, we view that as threatening us. And we don't like that. And what we also know from other experiments that are not based on our MRI machines, but what people do with information, how to respond, is that people tend to double down on their beliefs when they're presented with facts that contradict it. We've probably all seen that. So
Yes.
There's the backfire effect. So let's hold that aside for a second. Another dynamic that we know is there's something called mirror neurons. The mirror neurons describe the phenomenon of when, if we identify with somebody on an emotional basis, sometimes what we do is when we see them going through something, we make observations about what they're going through in their minds. Our minds want to mimic that. So that's why we've all seen laughter be contagious. We've all seen crying be contagious. We've even seen yawning be contagious, right? Out of the same sense. So there's a kind of a circuitry that can happen between people when there's identification that has happened, when we want to do what we think they're doing. Okay, so we got the backfire effect, we got mirror neurons. There's something called the reciprocity principle. And the reciprocity principle is something articulated by somebody called the Dean of Influence Studies, a guy named Robert Cialdini, and he basically has found that deeply embedded in the human character, he didn't find this, is it's almost rooted in evolutionary biology, not just of humans, but not just of mammals even, but even beyond that. When somebody does something nice to you, we know that we have an intuitive, we know intuitively that it might be in our best interest to do something at the same level of magnitude nice for them. So, and that's something that we learn as a survival mechanism, but this also affects our capacity to influence people. And then the last thing is the power of stories. Any high quality preacher or salesperson or lawyer will tell you that stories work better than facts. So to summarize all that, what we're gonna do is have a conversational strategy that doesn't fire up the backfire effect. It's not fact-based. Something that tends to engage our mirror neuron circuitry. We want to use the reciprocity principle so that the person becomes invested in being nice to us or being empathetic to us. And then we want to do all that through stories. Okay, so that sets up the framework for what I'm going to be talking about. So, and what I'm going to be talking about are 3 methods within this framework that I teach. I'm going to teach the core of it. It's a 5-step process, but I'm going to focus on the 3 steps in the middle. And they're often counterintuitive in our, given not only what we're taught about the nature of debate, but also how our social media feeds are constructed. We need to do things that are almost the opposite of what we're sort of pushed to do. And so let's start out. One of the things that we're inclined to do when we discover that somebody has different beliefs is to try to argue them down with facts. We've already discussed why that's unlikely to work, right? So we've already discussed the backfire effect. So what is better to do is to shift the conversation to experiences. Now you can, you shift it to experiences by asking a question about experiences. So somebody says to y'all that, you're in a conversation, you discover somebody thinks differently than you, and they look at gun control differently. You could break out statistics about the fact that states with more strict gun laws tend to have less both murders and mass murders. You could break that out. Or, as an alternative, you could have not a fact-based understanding, but you shift the conversation to a story-based thing where you want to ask them for a story about that explains why they feel. So when did you, tell me about the time when you first realized that that the Second Amendment was really important to you, that it was important that people have good access to guns. Tell me when you first started thinking about it. So you could go, that's a question that's an experience. I'm pulling from experience, but I'm going way back in time. Or tell me about a time recently, in the past, 3 or 4 years, when that something happened to you that reinforced your sense of the importance of gun access. If you have a long time, you could say, tell me about how your perspective on gun access has evolved over time. If you're at Thanksgiving and it's just the appetizers and you got a long time talking to this person, you might ask them more of a, tell me about how your opinion has evolved. But what you want to do is to get the person away from some recitation of facts or talking points. And people on both sides accuse the other side of just like spouting talking points that we've seen on TV or seen on social media. You're trying to move people away from facts and talking points and to their own personal experiences. And of course, the reason why is because your facts don't work. You're trying to fire up mirror neurons. And why are you asking first? Because ultimately, you want to get room for them to be curious about you, to hear you. So you want to ask them first, using the reciprocity principle and use for stories. So So let's as we go through this, let's keep track of two conversations. One is the conversation about whether to vote or not for inconsistent voters, and the other is so imagine that we vote. So imagine each of y'all know somebody who you think is left leaning but might not vote, and let's also imagine you might know a different person who is committed to voting but is undecided, right? They're Trump curious. They're not Trump committed. I'm not suggesting. Again, we can at the end we can talk about how these same methods work, what their effect is on the deep MAGA or the MAGA, but let's just talk about, imagine that you have an undecided voter that you want to influence. Okay, so again, you might ask a question that says, this on the undecided voter, so tell me some experience that happened that made you, that influenced you to stay kind of inconsistent about voting. So you ask a question to get them to tell you a story as opposed to some analysis point or some talking point they might have seen on some website about why it's not important to vote. First of all, does that make sense? Is that tracking, Chris?
Very much.
Okay. Becca, is that making
It
sense to
does.
you? Maybe Becca,
Sorry, yeah.
Does it make sense? Okay. Okay, so that's again, you're trying to shift the conversational ground to stories instead of facts. So if it was on the undecided voter, you might say, tell me some experience. This person is Trump curious. I'm assuming that you're opposed to Trump, right, Becca?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes, affirmatively. All right. So you might say, so if the person is curious, you might say, well, tell me something that draws you. Tell me some experience you had of just observing Mr. Trump that makes you inclined to want to vote for him, or makes you that helps make you undecided, because a lot of people think he's completely ridiculous. You don't. Tell me something that makes you want to partially inclined to vote for him. Okay, so basically you're asking a question, and you're trying to get them to talk about some experience they had of watching them on TV, or some experience they had about seeing them in the news, or you're trying to move to an experience, not some recitation of facts. So we're not inclined to do that, right? We're inclined to want to hit them with facts. So one additional point that is a part of this is that, as we know, a lot of people, what they do is they spout talking points that they've seen or read. Sometimes those talking points have insults in them. Like the insult, for example, that a person on the left might say is that those people on the right just want to control women's bodies. That whole abortion thing is just about controlling women's bodies. That's what it's really about. That's what those people really want. Now, I'm not saying there's no truth to that, but I'm saying that, you can imagine a principled anti-abortion person is probably not going to like that. That's going to feel like an insult to them, right? Or these people on the right, these people on the left, they just want to bring in a bunch of immigrants to manipulate the political system. No, there's a whole bunch of reasons to be in favor of more immigration, but probably very few people are doing this because of some, myth-based thing about manipulating the political system. So my point is, if you're trying to really engage somebody, it's important to know they might mix in with their talking points you're trying to move them away from to little insults. It's important not to get distracted by those insults. You want to fight those insults, but that's not necessarily helping you. Now you're having a conversation about some general sociological phenomenon, not about what was their experience that's driving their opinion. So whether you decide to say, I'm not sure I agree with you about what liberals want, but I want to get back to what happened, some experience you had that drives your view. And one of the things you can say that can help with that is, I find that I find more compelling when people tell me about experiences that happened to them. Because remember, they're trying to influence you too. So you can remind them, you can put out the bait of, you're more likely to influence me if you tell me a story. That can become part of your arsenal as you're trying to communicate. Okay, so that the first step is shift the conversational ground from facts and talking points to personal experiences. Now there's a middle ground that's better than facts, but I think not as good as personal experience, and that's values. Right? In between, from an effectiveness standpoint, I think facts and talking points are least effective, experiences are most effective, values are in the middle. So
Wait, say that again, please. Slowly?
The most ineffective thing for trying to influence somebody is talking about facts and talking points. The most effective, according to David, is, and a lot of people, is experiences. Personal experiences relevant to your views. But I'm saying there's something in the middle that's, I think, less effective than experiences, but more effective than facts, and that is values. So tell me some value you have that is driving your opinion about gun control, or some value you have that's driving your opinion about immigration, or whatever it is. So what I'm pointing out is that a values conversation is superior to a fact conversation. I think a personal experience conversation is still better than a values conversation. Does that make sense, Chris? Okay.
I'm just drawing a spectrum. I'm drawing a spectrum on my notes here.
Okay. Is that you tracking this, Becca?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, but the point is, you don't want to have the conversation based on facts and talking points. You want to get out of that. And if you even as you try to do that, if they say some things that are insulting, you want to sidestep arguments about facts. That's not going to help you. It's not going to help. It's unlikely to help you. Okay. In most instances, just for example, oh man, it's a time. Some studies have looked at. Go ahead.
So this having the conversation based on facts is let me just look back at my notes for a second. This is based in the backfire effect. Is that what it is? That
Yeah, basically,
is that
it's
the
it's
what
well,
you're connecting this concept?
yeah, that's the
to?
connection. Yeah, but the fact as a general matter, facts
Okay.
don't help you. And studies have been done about how many people are really affected by facts, and basically 23% of people are something called scientifically curious. That is a fact, a set of facts that are likely to change their opinion. And by the way, it's no difference between conservative and liberals. Before we get too high and mighty, it's about 23%. Less than a quarter of people are affected by facts. That's not what's affecting our perspective on things for the most part, for most of us. Okay, so the first finding that people need to know is if you're trying to influence people, you want to, you as a general matter, don't focus on facts. Focus on experiences. If you have to, focus on values, but don't focus on facts, because that just like you to waste your conversational time and make it more difficult. Okay. So that's how you want to start the conversation. Once you recognize there's a difference and you want to explore it, try to shift the conversational ground to what has happened to us to drive our opinion. What are experiences we've had a long time ago or recently or over a course of time that's driving our opinion. So that's finding number one.
Okay.
And that's counterintuitive to what we see happening in social media and what we're trained to do from school, right? So that's how you want to start. I want to now go to talk about what happens at the end, and then I'm going to tell you the hard part in the middle, which is obviously arguably the hardest part. So you start with asking them for some experience related to their perspective. Now, sometimes the nature of the conversation is you start out with your experience, but I would suggest that for the most part, you want to get them talking first. You want to demonstrate curiosity to them about their perspective because of the reciprocity principle. You make it, you open up their listening and empathy more if you demonstrate that to them. That's how you want to start. Now, how you want to end. What you want to move to is a personal experience that drives your view. Now, again, this is different than a fact-based analysis. So if you are a gun control person, like I am, for example, when I'm in these conversations, I will talk about an experience I had where I was outside a club trying to get in. It was crowded. It was a crowded outside. You know, the bouncers were trying to regulate people getting in. And I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where a crowd, the energy in a crowd changes. It feels a little bit like it goes from okay to like a little bit menacing or threatening. So that started to happen. And then some guy we're on the ground level. So a guy on the second floor, it might be the third floor balcony in the building, not the building we thought we were going in, but another building. He came out to the balcony. He was clearly strapped. He had a gun on him. And he didn't have a uniform on. And I'm not sure he was with he may or may not have been with the club. But like as soon as people saw that this dude had a gun, like things shifted back to the good space. Like it was just much better. This is a apparently non-police officer with a gun, and it just made it changed the atmosphere in a positive way. Now, I tend to be a gun control person, but in a conversation with a gun rights advocate, I will talk about that because actually I've told the wrong story. That's my middle story. What I should have told y'all, because okay, I'll tell y'all the end. The hard part in the middle is to agree with the person, but at the end, let me tell you another story. Like I sometimes live in a rural area. I'm moving from North Carolina to DC, and so North Carolina is an open carry state. So I've been in a restaurant where I wrote my second book, where I go in every day, and the waiters know me, etc. So one time this dude, people come in there, they got guns. That happens infrequently. That happens not infrequently. So one time this dude came in, and I felt a little uncomfortable around guns. But there's like a little while later, this other guy came in, and they were doing that mean mugging thing. Like they were looking at each other. They clearly had some sort of beef, and both these people had guns. And I was like, oh, I don't want to be around this. Like I quickly left because the presence of those guns, not by police officers, not trust police officers completely, but the presence of those guns among these people who had no discernible designation, and there's two of them. Oh no! So that I tell that story to make the point how I feel less safe generally with guns in the hands of non-police officers. And again, we'll leave police officers aside and how I feel about them. But my point is, I have a story that I can tell personally that is reasonably compelling, is reasonably understanding. It fires up other people's mirror neurons, right? I gave you the medium version. I can tell a longer version of that story. But I have a story that is about my belief in gun control. So what you want to do, if you're trying to influence somebody, let's say around voting, you want to have a story or two, a personal experience that relates to your position. So let's go back to the voting thing. I'm against Donald Trump. So I could tell a story about like January 6th. And I could talk about January 6th as a general matter, but I could also tell about how I felt watching that, which is I'm telling what happened, but I'm talking about me. I'm talking about how I felt to see those people and how both angry I was and disappointed in the country. I was thinking about how if there's black people, it'd be a whole different situation. I was thinking about these are supposed to be the law and order party. I mean, I could go on about it, but the point is, I can talk about how I felt. I can talk about how I felt when I saw him defend Vladimir Putin's understanding of things as opposed to the CIA. I mean, I could talk about my experiences, my direct experiences that are personal that influence how I felt about Donald Trump. I mean, the list goes on because he's such a problematic person. But the point is that I can talk personally. If I'm trying to influence somebody about Mr. Trump, I've thought about personal stories. I can talk about, again, I'm not going to waste time. There's so many stories about him, right? But I can make them personal. And the point is to talk about what I experienced and how I felt. And that's going to ultimately be more impactful, for the most part, than some factual discussion of why he's problematic. Becca, does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I have trouble coming up with the stories sometimes. Yes.
Okay, well, sometimes if you're doing conversational work, sometimes you think of it in advance. So yes, it's hard to come up with a moment, but if we know we're doing certain types of work, if you know that you're going for things, let's suppose that Kamala Harris wins. You want to have, and you're going to some family event or some social event where you're going to be talking about what happened. It's useful, for example, to talk about why you oppose Trump in the first place in personal terms. So yes, I'm not saying that this stuff doesn't take preparation, but I am saying that you're better off with your evidence being personal stories. Remember, in the first phase, you shift the whole conversation to talking about stories. That's the first phase. You ask. The last phase is you tell personal stories that help somebody understand your perspective based on stories, not based on some description of facts. So you want to work on that to influence to enhance your influence. Okay. So that's the first and the end, right? Now, I'm going to presume that Chris might be able to hear us, even though she said be right back. So I'm gonna plow forward because we got 21 minutes left. So the part of the middle. Let me just say one more thing because I tell we two parallel tracks of conversation about voting. So in terms of voting, if I'm trying to persuade somebody to vote, then I might ask them what makes them not want to vote, what makes them ambivalent about voting. Okay. I want to have a story about why I think voting is important. So, for example, when I used to, right out of college, I lived in Brooklyn, and I was fresh out of college and thinking about my career. I didn't want to vote, and somebody tried to persuade me to vote, and I just thought, it doesn't matter. I'm not gonna be living that long. And I can't remember the guy's name. Got elected, and he pursued a set of policies that made our neighborhood tangibly worse. He think it's making it better, but it makes it actually worse. So I have experienced what happens if you don't vote and what can happen with that. So if I'm trying to persuade somebody to vote, I might tell a story about that, or it might be the opposite. I might tell a story about supporting a candidate and the candidate doing what I wanted. But the point is, I have a personal story that's related to my point of view. Okay. So I talked about how you start. That's where you go. You start with a personal story. You start with asking a personal story from them. You're going to later on go to a personal story from you that expresses your point of view. Now, here is the hardest part in persuasion, but arguably the most important. In the middle, what you want to do is to pursue a conversational strategy where you're basically trying to convey, I don't think you're completely an idiot. You want to try to do what you can to create a sense of agreement in the encounter. So the best way of doing that is if you can identify an experience you had that supports their actual position. So remember I talked about, I told y'all, not intending, I told y'all about when the gun made me feel safer. That's an exceptional experience. But I had it. And that's an example of an experience that supports the other person's position. So from an influence standpoint, what you want to do is to try to create a sense of agreement. Basically, before you try to tell somebody that I think you should update your views, you want to convey, I don't think your views are completely ridiculous. I get how you might feel like that. And you can do that by telling a story that supports their opinion, or maybe you talk about some value that you have in common. So for example, gun control and gun rights people both are largely grounded in the value of safety. So you might talk about the importance of safety as an example. It's some story that illustrates the importance of safety. So basically you're saying your overall gestalt of this whole part of the conversation is, I don't think you're completely ridiculous. At least we share some values. Now, in this particular case I gave, at least you share some, sometimes your opinion is the right opinion. That's even more specific. But the general point, and we're not inclined to do when we're disagreeing with somebody, is to try to validate them and to come as close as possible to trying to validate them. And I'm saying you do that most effectively through a story. So if I'm talking to somebody who is an inconsistent voter, then I might need to, and they're opting out of a process, I might talk about how when I was it doesn't have to be voting. When I was in high school, my teammates on the basketball team tried to get me to want to be a captain. They want to put my name for a captain, but I didn't want to do that. I opted out of that. I didn't want to participate, right? So if you're trying to influence somebody who is a inconsistent voter, that's family first, right? No problem. and you can watch the recording. Should be on Facebook. I think this is going on Facebook as opposed to cross my fingers. You can watch that part later. The point is, what we're talking about, Chris, is remember in the beginning, you shift the conversational ground to experiences by asking for experiences. What I said is that you will summarize with a story that helps them understand your opinion. But now we're talking about the middle part, which is you try to create a sense of agreement, hopefully through stories. Because if you're trying to tell somebody that they need to adjust their opinion, what you want to make sure that they understand is you don't think they're completely ridiculous. And so you can do that by talking about some experience that might validate their point of view, even if you think that's the minority truth. Like, remember I told you about the time when the gun made me feel safer, right? Even though as a matter of fact, I think this country would be way better off without guns in it. But I have had an experience, I think it's the exception, where a gun made me feel safer. We don't want to talk about, like, a lot of times people don't want to do that because we give them an inch, they'll take a mile, and we feel it undermines their position. But the truth is that it strengthens your influence if you talk about an experience that supports their point of view because they trust you more, right? You're training them to look at your experience as valid. Remember, the sequence is hear from them, agree with them, and then challenge them, right? And I'm giving you, I explained the middle part last, but it's the middle part. So basically the sequence is, again, hear from them, foster agreement as much as possible at the experience level or maybe at the values level before you try to challenge them on your experience. First of all, does that make sense to Becca? Is that holding up, at least conceptually?
Yes, absolutely.
Chris, does that make sense?
You're muted, Chris.
Chris, you.
Sorry. Okay. No, not exactly.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I had in my notes, ask them for their experience,
Yep.
then sharing a personal experience. And that sharing of a personal experience, is that an effort to find some common?
Right, but what I'm saying is you do that second. Like I told you I told you in different order. So the first thing you do is to get them to talk about their personal experience, the personal experience that is behind their point of view. Then you try to create a sense of agreement. Best if you can do that by talking about a personal experience. So if I'm talking to a gun rights advocate, I might first ask, so what's some experience you had that makes you be in favor of gun rights?
Okay.
I'll do that
I got
first.
it.
Then I'm going to try to tell them personal experience as much as I can that says I don't think you're completely crazy. So I happen to have had an experience where a gun made me feel safer, even though that's the minority experience. I'm trying to create a sense of agreement. If I don't have an experience that does that, I might talk about how. So it sounds like it's based on safety. Well, I agree with safety. I might not talk about what I'm going to talk about, which is an experience where the presence of a gun made me feel less safe. I might just talk about safety generally. Basically, my point in the conversation is to try to say you aren't completely crazy, right? I validate I have some level of validation of you, of the way you're seeing the world before you try to invite them to see the world differently. And the more you can come close to a personal experience to do that is better because personal experiences are more impactful. Okay.
Okay. Got it.
So, and you might have, if I'm trying to persuade somebody to vote, they tell me some reason that they wanted to opt out of voting. They tell me that, and I might talk about how I can identify with that because I'll talk about the experience in high school where I didn't want to become the captain. I opted out, right? It wasn't even about voting, but I opted out of a collective experience, right? So basically, I get opting out is the point. Before I tell them another story about how I either opted in and was happy about it or opted out and regretted it. I'm not trying to correct them first. I'm trying to validate them first. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're being strategic. And first of all, Becca, Chris and I talked earlier today on the phone, but you can see how these methods we're doing are related to, like, Chris does a lot of facilitation of dialogue just like I do. These techniques are not dissimilar to what you do in a group setting when trying to get a lot of opinions out, et cetera, but you're just doing the same techniques in a one-on-one conversation. Okay, so far, I want to give y'all time for questions and troubleshoot issues. But my goal was to share with you the three basic methods. First method, get them to tell a story about that relates to what they believe, or more than one story. Now we're going to go in the order. Try to create a sense of agreement so that they don't see you as the enemy or as they don't go tribal, because you're affirmatively trying to say, I don't think you're completely ridiculous, before you tell them the third is tell them a story that tries to help them understand through a story why you feel like you feel. Okay, we got
Got it.
11 minutes left. Can you imagine doing that with some of the people that you were talking about, Chris? How does that feel when I've explained all that? Does that sound unfeasible?
Well, so it's feasible on an individual level, but there's frequently, for me, I've experienced just there's no discussion, and I'll just talk about the political divide in the U.S. I'll be in a social situation where there's no discussion about politics at all, and then all of a sudden there'll be sort of a flicker of something that someone says, and then it's explosive, and at that point, there's really nothing I can do. I feel because there's too many people. There's too many people that are almost they're so intense about what they believe to be true, and I'm completely outnumbered at that point. So then I tend to back away, and the opportunity to speak with someone one-on-one would be a better way for me to do this kind of work. And basically it's it's a commitment that I have to,
Okay. Well, I'm not.
everybody in my life, that I try to do my best to ensure that we're set up for success for the next generation. So I feel like I have some obligation here, but I feel outnumbered sometimes, most of the times, in my social situations in Texas.
Okay. So here's what I invite you to think about. I got you, and that's real, right? Here's what I invite you to consider. I bet you that when it kind of flares up and gets really animated, but almost all the people feel different than you, right? That's what you said, right? You feel outnumbered,
Mm-hmm.
right? Got it. And I'm not. What I'm about to say doesn't get rid of all that. But here's what. Let's do a thought experiment. What if you said, y'all expressing a lot of opinions here. I hear a lot of facts or even talking points that I hear on TV. I'm interested, John. Tell me about like a personal experience that happened that makes you think like that. Like what if you wanted to engage? Like what do you think would happen if you basically try to shift the ground of the conversation to personal experiences that make you think like that? Here's my theory. I want to hear your answer. My theory is if they did that, it would create a different kind of conversation. It would create a less obnoxious moment for you, because people will be telling stories as opposed to spouting talking points. But am I crazy? What do you think?
You're not crazy, but the one time that I have actually had this type of a conversation that you're describing was not in a group. It was with some very good friends of mine, and the was really with the wife, and I tried to, and without knowing this method, David, that you're teaching, I tried to explore her experiences, but I could not get her to tell me a story. She kept going back to some basically rhetoric
Some talking points.
she was she kept repeating the same thing over and over. And at that point, I didn't know how to handle the conversation.
Right. Well, okay. So look, Like I think that what I'm saying is really effective, and people study influence say that ain't no silver bullets out there. It's not gonna
Yeah,
get through
I
to every
know.
knucklehead out there. It's not. It's just a higher percentage bet, right? It's a higher percentage bet. Some people are committed to their talking points. You know, I mean, you have good facilitation skills. I'm sure you leaned in and said, that's really interesting. You obviously consume a lot of media, but what would really affect me is to hear something that happened to you personally, because so much. I mean, you could. I can only finish all that. I want to hear from Becca. I'm just saying. I'm not saying everybody. As somebody said to me, there are just some pancakes that cannot be flipped, right? So let's you can't affect everybody. But I'm just wondering whether a leaning in and from a place of empathy and deep curiosity, and to explicitly counter like something that happened to you, because those stories affect me more, right? Let's see. So anyway, that's it's hard again, but some people are kind of beyond reach. Becca, what's your top of my response to this in our last 6 minutes? What's your reaction to what I've been talking
My
about?
biggest takeaway is that I need to spend some time thinking about the stories that I can tell before I get into the conversations. And so I'm going to do that. And I thank you for that. And to Chris's point, personally, I'm more of a one-on-one person. And when 3 or 4 people go at me at one time, I just shut down. I do. And I'm not probably going to fix that today.
Sure.
So,
right.
So I make the point of trying to pair people off and say, let's have lunch, let's have coffee, and have that if I want to delve in to do it separately. And this format you just gave me, if I have some stories lined up, will be really valuable.
There's no question. I appreciate you saying that. There's no question that this kind of thing I'm talking about works better one-on-one. I would say though that if you're surrounded by people who are looking at the world very differently, I mean, you could always say, let's talk about something else. But I would still submit to you that even shifting them to a story-based conversation will feel better to you than them all spouting their talking points. It creates it's because storytelling fires up mirrors neurons. Like it's just a better experience you create for yourself and argue for them. Okay.
And the point making to Chris, instead of saying to one person, tell me a story, but I'd really like to understand to the group. I'd really like to better understand who can tell me a story.
Who can tell me a story that really helps me understand it from an experience standpoint? Because I find experiences affect me. I find that affects me more and I feel closer to people, right? You incentivize it to them. So anyway, we got 4 minutes left. So here's a core thing I want to just make sure is y'all hear and is on this tape for people who are not with us tonight. This same kind of method of interpersonal engagement is going to be what we need. Let's assume Kamala Harris wins the election, and we got half of America mad, and those people in you that y'all know are still angry about what happened, and we will have a national challenge of reckoning with what did this do Trump? What was that? Like if Trumpism is defeated, we're still going to have the task of creating a national narrative about what happened. It's going to be useful for us to have this kind of conversation. Now let's go right in our next 3 minutes. Let's go back to Trump specifically. As an example, if you're trying to affect an undecided voter, it is useful for you to have something positive to say about the MAGA movement or Mr. Trump. Now, I've been in churches. In fact, I'm not sure it was your church, Becca. I've been in UU churches where these are the peace and love people who I've said, and I've put this idea out. You gotta have something positive to say about Mr. Trump. They're like, he ain't got no positive qualities. I've been in more Christian churches that are more like, the whole like everybody's a child of God, and people still saying that. So my encouragement is that if you want to affect undecided voters, it is useful for you to think of something to say, or more than one thing, that's positive about either Mr. Trump or the MAGA movement. So, for example, I think that the MAGA movement, as much as I think it's a problem, has fired up some people's sense of patriotism. It's actually done that on both sides. You can see, you could argue that the way that the Democrats were talking about patriotism at the Democratic convention is a reflection of that. But it certainly did that on the other side. Well, even though I think that patriotism is tinged with a whole bunch of other stuff I don't like, I could legitimately say that one thing about the MAGA movement did is that it inspired people to be more patriotic. I can legitimately say Mr. Trump is relentless in pursuit of his goals. Now, I think he's a horrible person, et cetera, but I could talk about him as relentlessly pursuing his objectives and being very persuasive. My point is that if we're going to do the work of reconciling this country, it's important for us and for you to heal relationships in your life to not only talk about MAGA and Trump negatively. It's important for you to do that. And you see how that fits into what I was talking about, right? You can't, it is not effective to tell people you are a complete idiot. It doesn't help you. So what's counterintuitive, if you want them to come over to you.
It doesn't.
It is not helpful. Right. I hope y'all can see how the things that we need to do to try to influence people for the election are the same counterintuitive conversation skills that we will need after the election in order to try to move people forward. It's the same set of skills. And so my challenge is to figure out how I can get that message out to people. People need to be practicing this stuff now. And we're at time. I'll go a little bit further and then we'll close. It turns out that there's something called affective polarization. And we've all seen where a whole bunch of the MAGA people, they dislike liberals just because they're an identity group that's different. It's called affective polarization. And it turns out that if you create a non-noxious, maybe empathy-based encounter with a MAGA person, if you look at large numbers of people, it lessens support for MAGA because some of what's driving MAGA is the hatred of liberals. So if you create a moment where somebody is listened to, they're taken seriously, somebody is curious about their stories, tries to foster some agreement, it lessens support for MAGA. So even though I don't suggest that people spend a lot of time talking to those people, if you run across somebody who is deep in the MAGA bag, it is still useful to use that moment as a chance to practice these counterintuitive skills, which are useful for persuasion and reconciliation after. Does that make sense to y'all?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a chance to practice. So I know we're a little past time. Is there any questions or things y'all want to say before we close out? We're out of the time. And I know it's 4 a.m. where Chris is, so we need out of the time. I can't believe you showed up, Chris.
Well, this was very much worth it. Yeah, it's really a pleasure to see you again. And to meet you, Becca. I wrote down your name. I'll try to look you up on LinkedIn or something.
Okay.
It makes a lot of sense, David. Really, either way this election goes, we are going to have to do a tremendous amount of healing as a nation.
And healing is going to mean listening to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think that's the only way. It's the only way.
Becca, you got any final comments?
I agree with Chris, and it's frightening, but I thank you for these skills, and I will try hard to come up with stories and start practicing it.
All right. Well, feel free thank y'all so much for coming. Feel free to comment about this positively on social media because, as you can see, not many people get the wisdom involved in this. So the more y'all can talk about this as a positive experience, the better. I appreciate that. And if I do another one of these, I'll let y'all know. But I really appreciate y'all taking the time. One from sickness and one from lateness of the hour. So thank y'all so much. And I will see y'all next time. And get out there and talk to people and practice our compassion skills. It's so important.
Thank you. Thank you for what you do, David.
All right. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Record.